All right, welcome to the conversation on the TYT Network. We have a wonderful progressive for you guys today. He is the the professor of democracy and justice at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. I love that title. It doesn't get any better than that. He's also the author of the book FDR and Democracy: The Greatest Speeches and Writings of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Professor Harvey K., great to have you back on the Young Turks.
It's great to see you, Cenk. Really great.
All right. So, Harvey, why do we need FDR right now?
Well, obviously, we're in the middle of a crisis that even before the coronavirus, we were in a crisis that probably compares to the greatest crises Americans have had to face, whether it was the Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression of the 1930s, the fight against fascism. I mean, these were crises that threatened the very being of the United States, its purpose and promise. And we were already, after 40 years, in a crisis that warranted dramatic progressive action. And then, unexpectedly, one could say, we end up in the middle of a crisis that calls to our attention all the more the crisis of the planet, the crisis of our well-being, and the crisis of inequality in America, which we see every day when the likes of Lieutenant Governor of Texas talks about his willingness to sacrifice certain people so that they can make more money in the state of Texas.
So, Harvey, let's ask tough questions. You were a supporter of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders at times ran on a platform that was incredibly similar to FDR, but he lost. So why do you think he lost?
Well, I think he lost for a variety of reasons. I mean, obviously, the Democratic National Committee had its plans and its aspirations, or preferably to use the word ambitions, to make sure that Bernie did not win. Okay, so I don't think there's any question that whatever faults Bernie had, he was up against the challenge that he faced equally in 2016 of the DNC determination to not allow him to win. But it's also the case, and I really do believe that Bernie in many ways failed us in 2016, and in some ways came so close to doing what needed doing. And that is, he probably, to my mind, should have literally cloaked himself in Franklin Roosevelt, in the New Deal, in the rights of labor. I mean, he had all of this on the agenda. But the fact was that when in a debate with the likes of Biden and the others, and they looked out at the American people, and had the audacity, remember, this is only several weeks ago, had the audacity to say, we cannot afford Medicare for all. He should have taken control of that debate and said, wait a minute, are we the party of Franklin Roosevelt? The Franklin Roosevelt who in 1935 signed into law the Social Security Act, an act that he would have wanted to include national health care had it not been for the opposition of big business and the American Medical Association. And then in the 1940s, when he called for the Economic Bill of Rights, he knew very well that when he talked about national health care, that 85% of Americans wanted national health care in 1943, 44, 45. So I think if he had grabbed hold of FDR, Eugene Debs, the American labor leader and socialist, once was defending himself in court, and he brought into the courtroom a whole bunch of American progressives, from Thomas Paine to Abraham Lincoln and others. And I think in many ways what Bernie should have done at that moment is bring FDR onto the stage. And that way, if they're going to attack Bernie Sanders, they would be attacking Franklin Roosevelt. But that's my own particular campaign of these last several months.
Yeah, so I hear you on that, but the FDR story, and that's what you're an expert on, what you wrote the book on, is both incredibly encouraging for politics and incredibly discouraging at the same time. So the encouraging part, Harvey, is that politics can make a giant difference. So if FDR hadn't pushed for Social Security, we would, and hadn't fought like hell for Social Security, we wouldn't have had Social Security, including all the way up to now, because look, he tried for national health care, couldn't get it, and then it's gone. It's gone for 80 years, gone. Yeah. Nobody has it. So they got Social Security passed, and now people are not starving in the streets like they were in the bad old days where senior citizens were thrown bootstraps. And we could have had that system. And right now, the Paul Ryans of the world and the Donald Trumps of the world would have been saying, hey, listen, man, the private system is the best system. And, if they don't have the private, savings, that's their problem. And they should be able to deal with that. And we don't want communism around here, et cetera. On the other hand, though, Harvey, and talk to me about this, it's also discouraging because, Jesus Christ, we're still fighting the same damn battle. And for all this time, the forces against national health care have been winning.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it this way, Cenk. For a start, when I said 1943-44, 85% of Americans wanted national health care, if one actually looks closely at the surveys ever since then, though the numbers may not have been that high through the 50s into the 60s, never in the course of those decades did fewer than 50% of Americans want national health care assured for every American. That's to start. And I can tell you, I've been measuring this. And I mean, I'm 70 years old now, and I'm thinking back to 1970 when I was, that's how many years ago? 50 years ago. So here's the thing. In 1970, you could not have convinced me that we would not have had national health care sooner. We had Medicare and Medicaid in 1965 with Lyndon Johnson. That was supposed to be the lever, the wedge by which we were going to end up with national health care. Even Richard Nixon had a plan for it. Teddy Kennedy wanted to pursue it. It's unbelievable. It isn't only the opposition of the Republicans and corporations. It's the failure of the Democrats to remember that they're the party of Roosevelt. And moreover, to pay attention to the needs of working people and the working poor, for which for too long they have turned their back on that. So one of the reasons I put this book together, this collection of FDR, hoping, in fact, that we'd see a Sanders victory and presidency, and it might well empower him with words, is also the fact I want to remind Americans that there was a president, a very significant president, one of our 2 or 3 greatest presidents, who wanted these kinds of developments. And we have it in our power, not to get too close to Thomas Paine to begin the world over again, but we do have it in our power to pursue these things. And my concern right now is that we should not, in the wake of Bernie's withdrawal or Bernie's defeat, presume that it's over. I mean, the fact is the struggle continues. And indeed, even now, we should be pressing and pressing to push, even if he doesn't want to do it, to push Biden and the Democrats to the left on these kinds of questions. And whether it's Trump who wins in November, in which case we have to turn the resistance into something far more than a resistance, I mean, direct action on a far greater scale, or if it's Biden. Biden has got to be pushed, absolutely pushed. And I say, let's use FDR's words to make those kinds of pushes possible.
Ironically, it was the older generation that should remember FDR better that wound up voting for Biden and against not just Bernie Sanders, but all of those progressive agendas that FDR stood for. It wasn't just healthcare. I mean, you read the book that Harvey's got out, you'll see. I mean, FDR, would have been ridden out of town in today's Democratic Party, and he would have been ridden out of town by MSNBC. They would have called him a radical, rabble-rouser, et cetera. But it was that older generation that voted against those principles. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think however much young people respond to the term democratic socialism, older folks do not. And I think that was a problem that Bernie had in many ways from the outset. I think, for example, I mean, I'm not splitting hairs here. I think the term social democracy would have been far more effective. But even beyond that, it's my generation we're talking about. And who would have thought my generation, the so-called radical generation of the 60s, would have turned out to be this sort of staid sort of generation of in their 60s and 70s. So it's, things happen, which is also, by the way, and I think this is important. Everyone says, look, younger generations is progressive. And that's the generation of the future. Don't live politically on demographics. Don't. Politics is the most important thing. And politics demands not just action, it demands words, persuasive words that will resonate in the American imagination. That's again, one of the reasons why I think we need to take hold of our history. We need to look back to FDR. Look, the times are different, but the challenges seem to remain the same.
Harvey's got these amazing books that teach you how things were, the reality of it, the reality of how we got changed through FDR. So check out FDR and Democracy, the greatest speeches and writings of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But also check out Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, and so many others that Harvey's written. Thank you so much for joining us, Harvey.
Thank you, Cenk. I look forward to our meeting next time in person.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.